Hi there, welcome to the chapter 4 lecture, the first part of the lecture today. Now, we just covered evolution mainly in chapter 3, so now we're going to talk about species interacting and how they interact with each other. So, this is all about community ecology, species with other species. Let's begin. First type of species interaction is we're going to talk about is competition. Well, competition generally means you use the same resources. Most of the time they're competing for food or shelter or water. It depends on what they may need. Intra versus interspecific. Same species, intra. Different species. You have a hyena here and a lion here. In this case, you have interspecific competition. So they compete for similar food resources, basically. They're competing for the same food resources. So intra, inter. All right. Let's talk more about so competition sometimes can exclude another species basically. If a competitor is stronger, that's called so basically competitive exclusion is when a species outcompetes another species and they generally are competing for food or space or like I said water. So their competitive exclusion means one species more powerful than the other species. Coexistence is pretty common in nature. Nature generally finds a balance, and species can generally live together in nature. All right. Well, so let's talk about how they start living in nature, and it has to do with this term niche. This term is kind of complicated. All right. What's a niche? A niche is an organism's role in nature. That role could mean a lot of things. It could have to do with its habitat or its food source, or how it finds its food. Anything pretty much about an organism falls under its niche. So let's talk about the fundamental niche. So let's say, for example, this is one species, species one, and let's just say this is the area or the space that comprises this particular species. Basically, it's resources and it's resources that it can utilize. So this would be species one niche. Well, in nature, species one doesn't have use of all those resources. There might be species two and species three. All right. So its entire available resources would be its fundamental niche, its full potential. I mean, this is everything they can utilize. All right. But in real life, species can't utilize their entire niche because of competition. So for example, you'll have some overlap of niches. Species two, their niche overlaps part of species one. Species three overlaps part of species two and part of species one. So the part that species one can actually utilize is called its realized niche. All right. So because of competition and other interactions, they can't utilize their entire niche. So species one is now limited to this small area as what's called its realized niche. All of its resources would be called its fundamental niche. Here's another way they can live together in nature. What they do is they partition or separate their resources. So here's an example. You have all these different birds in this tree, and they have figured out a way to partition resources. This guy here comes and picks up insects coming down the tree. This guy here pecks into the wood of the tree looking for insects stuck in sap. This woodpecker here makes pretty big holes and looks for big insects inside. This insect here is also looking for tiny insects. So what they've done is they've partitioned or separated the tree into different areas. Okay. What does this do? Well, this causes character displacement. What that means is these different species of birds, because they're living in a partitioned environment where their resources are all divided up, well, they start evolving, they start adapting, and their populations will start looking similar because they're using the similar resources. So character displacement basically means that the species are going to diverge in their characteristics, and that's because their food sources are limited. And with this limited food source, nature will select for certain types of beaks, for example, in these birds. And that's called character displacement. Certain characteristics get displaced or not, they're gone, while other characteristics, you might start seeing them flourish. Predation. Now, this is another species interaction. Things eat each other. It's part of nature. Prey get eaten. Predators are the eaters, basically. This right here is a graph that shows you, this is probably the most common graph when you talk about a predator and a prey relationship. The blue is the hare. The red is the lynx. You'll probably notice that there's way more of the prey than there is of the predator. Way more. All right. And that's common. As you go up a food chain, you lose biomass. So as you go up the food chain, you should have less of what's above it. So there's less links available than there are here. Here are ways organisms might use an ability to either be better predators or to be better prey, meaning they can hide better. Cryptic coloration is a fancy word for camouflage. It would be used by the prey and by the predator. The predator would use it to get closer to their prey, whereas the prey would use it to hide. Warning coloration. So every now and then you'll see a certain type of a bee, for example, or a certain kind of snake, and it's got these crazy colors on it. And you're like going, we've been told to stay away from snakes that are colorful because they're usually poisonous. So you have warning coloration. All right. This right here, mimicry, is when one species tries to behave or look like. It doesn't really behave. It might look like another species. Therefore, predators of it will leave them alone. So this, for example, shows a caterpillar that has these eye spots, and it looks like a snake or the head of a snake. So predators of this caterpillar are like, whoa, that's a snake. We're going to stay away from that thing because the snake is going to fight back a lot more than the actual caterpillar. So this is one of those. This is called mimicry. This is called warning coloration, and this is called cryptic coloration. Another relation, parasitism. This is a relationship where one species gets harmed, called the host, and one species gets benefited, called the parasite. Usually, just so you know, this parasitism usually does not lead to death of the host. If it always led to death of the host, that species would be selecting against itself, basically. Right now, we have a virus plaguing the planet, COVID, coronavirus, and basically it doesn't kill most people right away. And that's a good thing for the virus. Because it doesn't kill most people right away, does it give those people an opportunity to spread it? And most people don't die from the coronavirus. So the fact that that virus doesn't kill its host allows the virus to be spread farther and farther and farther, and that's what makes these viruses even worse. Ebola virus, that virus kills people very quickly, so it actually selects against itself. Because it kills people so quickly, they're not spreading it, so the virus it comes to a death, basically, and the virus dies with the host in most cases. Pathogens, that would be Ebola, something that makes you sick, or a parasite that causes disease. All right. Malaria, tuberculosis, these are all the different kinds of, they're all caused by pathogens. Malaria is when you're drinking bad water, something floating around. TB, bacteria, it's an infection. We were just talking about a virus a second ago, the coronavirus. Coevolution, all right, this is what happens when parasites and hosts, they kind of adapt and they counter-adapt to each other, all right? So what happens? They start developing defenses for each other. Then so the host develops a defense to the parasite. Then the parasite gets a little bit worse because it figures out a way to get by the host. Now, this doesn't happen because it needs it. There just happens to be variation in the population that allows it to happen. So coevolution doesn't happen because it needs to happen. It happens as a result of the variation that already exists in the population. Herbivory, this is a fancy word that is basically predators of plants for the most part. So insects are the main predators of plants. There are herbivores out there, a lot of grazing animals, but the main eaters and the most common type of herbivore, insects. They're plant predators, and we call that herbivory, basically. Plants, over time, though, they figured out how to defend themselves. Some are toxic, some are poisonous, some have pricks, some will poke you if you go near them. Some have irritating hairs on them. So plants have evolved their own defenses as a result of coevolution with their predators. Symbiosis, this is just a simple definition, so a close association. A lot of the things we talked about might even be considered close associations, like competition and predation and things of that sort. Symbiosis, pretty much the types include, I already said it, competition, predation, parasitism, another one, mutualism, and commensalism. So we've already talked about these three. Now let's talk about mutualism and commensalism. Mutualism is when two organisms live together and they both benefit. So in this case here, the bird is getting food, all right? The plant is allowing its DNA in the form of pollen to be spread from one flower to another flower. So the bird is getting food while the plant here, the flower here, is being aided in its reproduction process. This is an example of commensalism. All these little fish and even taxi fish or remora fish that attach to sharks, they basically live and swim around the shark all day long. The shark doesn't eat them because he doesn't waste his time on them. They don't have enough. They don't give him enough energy. So the shark basically allows them to swim here. So shark gets nothing out of this relationship. They don't benefit. They don't get hurt. These guys don't hurt the shark. They don't affect the shark. What do they get out of it? Protection. By being near a shark, the things that want to eat them won't come near the shark because the shark in turn will then eat that predator of these smaller fish. So they're getting protection. The shark isn't being hurt, nor they're not benefiting nor being hurt by the situation. This is commensalism. Over here we have mutualism. Feeding levels, also known as trophic levels. This is how energy is passed along through food chains and food webs. This is a big part of the AP class. Almost on every AP test, I've seen a food web with questions related to the food web. So let's start breaking the parts of it down. You're going to notice producers on a food web. They're also called the primary producers. Same thing. These are the organisms that produce the food. All right. Here's an example. Grass on land, terrestrial, in the ocean or in a body of water. You have phytoplankton. These are the producers of those particular habitats. Herbivores only eat producers. We might say only eat plants, but it's not only plants. Something in the ocean only eats phytoplankton. It is also an herbivore. Okay. Carnivores, they only eat consumers. So they only eat things that also eat. All right. Omnivores, they eat both a producer and a consumer. So they're going to eat what some of you would call a plant and what some of you would call meat or tissue. All right. How are the levels classified, the trophic levels? We begin with the first order or primary consumers. Okay, what do they eat? Well, the zooplankton eats the phytoplankton. This grasshopper eats the grass. All right. Then we have secondary. Well, these guys, these fish eat the zoo. These rodents eat the grasshoppers. All right. Third, or a fancy word for third, tertiary. All right. This bird eats this fish. This bird eats that rodent. Okay, this is our third level. Then you can get to your fourth level or even your fifth level. All right. Not common in nature. You don't see, generally in nature, you won't see above a five or a fifth order consumer. Just so you know, it's not that common, but it can happen. All right. Fancy word for fourth, I forgot to tell you, is quaternary. All right. Detrivores, things that scavenge waste and dead bodies. All right. Detrivores are things that eat dead things. All right. Decomposers, these are the bacteria and the fungus, and they break down tissue. These are the recyclers of the environment, basically. So your decomposers are your recyclers of the environment. Your detrivores are your scavengers, basically. Decomposers, you will not see them usually on a food web, nor detrivores, because they're just not usually shown on there because they'll eat anything, basically. All right. So as you go up, you'll see this pyramid. There's a pyramid. This is called a biomass pyramid. Or an energy pyramid, same thing. The base, the producers form the base of this pyramid. All right. So this could be units of energy. For example, 1,000 joules, or it could be mass, 1,000 kilograms. Either one will work. As you go up to the next level, you lose 90% of that mass or of that energy is lost in a successive feeding. So only 10% is passed on. So 1,000 becomes 1,000 kilograms or 1,000 joules would become 100 kilograms or 100 joules of the primary consumers. These guys then get eaten by the secondary. Only 10% of that gets passed on. So there's only 10% of this particular rodent. And then they get eaten, and only 10% more gets passed on. So if you notice, the biomass shrinks by 90% in every successive eating. This is why you don't see more than a fourth or a fifth level consumer. If we went to fourth, it would be 0.1, and if we went to fifth, it'd be 0.01 the mass. So there's too much loss in all these successive feedings in these trophic levels, and the loss is due to the amount of heat that is lost through each conversion of energy, basically. All right. And I just mentioned this. I just demonstrated how the biomass changes as you move up. Okay. So as you go up a food chain, less biomass. As you go down a food chain, more biomass. And by the way, this also leads to your footprint. when you eat low on the food chain, where we have the most biomass, you are doing something better for the planet because there's more available food. If we were all vegetarians, we wouldn't have a problem with food on our planet. But most of us eat, for example, cows and chickens, for example. So that makes us a secondary. So cows and chickens would be here. That would be a secondary. So because you lose so much biomass as you go up the food chain, eating meat is bad for the planet because of that loss of biomass. So if we were all vegetarians, there'd be a lot more biomass to feed people. Food chains and food webs. Food chains are linear. Food webs are not. Okay, they are not. So let's talk about this. Which trophic level do the following belong? Let's do the mouse, for example. All right, so I want to know what order consumer is the mouse. You do not give a number to the producer. So the grass is our producer, and you'll notice there's no arrows. No arrows point at the grass. That's because the grass doesn't eat anything. Arrows show the flow of energy. So the grass's energy goes to the grasshopper, to the rabbit, and to the mouse. So there's no feeding level here. So if you're going to give a number to the producer, you would call that 0. That is not a feeder. But the mouse is a first order or primary consumer. That's a first order or primary consumer. The snake. So if the mouse is a first, the snake is a second order consumer. 0, 1, 2. Okay. The lizard is over here. The lizard is a 0, 1, 2. Okay. The hawk. There's more than one way to get to the hawk. So you have to check all the ways. 0, 1, 2. 0, 1, 2. 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's a 2. It's a 3. Let's see, is it anything else? 0, 1, 2. 0, 1, 2, 3. So the hawk is a 2 and a 3. Which organisms compete with the hawk? Well, if they compete, they eat the same thing. So the hawk and the lizard, they both, I guess they compete for the grasshopper. Okay. They also compete. The hawk and the snake will also compete for the mouse here, right? Even though the hawk eats them, it still competes with them for food also because they eat the same thing. All right, and we're going to stop there today.